Hello, romantics. I'm Sarah Gomez, author, romance lover, and host. You're listening to Romancing the Story, a podcast centered around writing, reading, and story structure, all with a twist of romance. We're at episode 26, and on today's episode, I have a lovely chat with Clarissa Gosling on methods for writing, accountability, and the 365 Writing Challenge. My dogs got a little excited during the interview, so you might hear them bark just a little in the beginning, but nothing major. A quick update for the podcast. I have a YouTube channel now, and I've been uploading the video versions of the interviews. If you're interested, I put a link to the YouTube channel in the show notes. With that said, let's jump right in. Welcome YA fantasy author and admin for the 365 Writing Challenge, Clarissa Gosling. Yay!
Hi
there. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. And in case listeners don't know, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing?
Sure. I am British, but I live in the Netherlands. We moved here about 8 years ago now. And as my children started going to school, it was like, okay, so what do I do now? And I'd always talked about writing more. And I had so many notes of this would make a great story and that would make a great story. And I decided to actually sit down and do something with that rather than just keep making notes of, all these old story ideas that were bouncing around in my head. So that's what I did. And I started writing. Well, I joined the 365 Writing Challenge. That was one of the first things I did. And that propelled me into actually writing rather than talking about writing, if you see the difference.
Very much so. I think we all have that struggle with that as writers, right? We talk about it, and then when it actually comes to writing it, it's different.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had all sorts of different ideas, and I like, which one do I start with? How do I go about doing this? The best way to learn how to write a book is to write a book. So I wrote one, and I was like, nobody's ever going to see this. I am writing this just for me. And that was really freeing because literally my idea was like a one sentence thing of what was going to happen. Is it was completely pantsing. I had no idea what was going on. And, every so often I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. Okay, they're going to go and have a cup of tea. And then something out of that happened. So I don't know how many times in that book, I haven't dared reread it again. I don't know how many times she goes and has a cup of tea, or she goes to the kitchen to make a cup of tea. And then, I don't know, she comes back and somebody's there, or she sees something through the window or whatever. And it's horrible. I don't want to go back and look at it, but it showed me what it means to write a story that's a book length, because I'd never done that before. I'd written short stories and whatever and stuff at school and all those things. And so I did it, and I was like, okay, I've got this one, and I'm going to hide that one away. What do I do next? And I realized that most of the ideas I had were young adult fantasy ones about finding characters finding themselves and where they belong and their place in the world and what their purpose is. And so I'm like, okay, well, they always say one thing, start with a niche and then try and keep things similar so that then you can start to build an audience and blah, blah, blah. So that's what I do. I'm writing young adult fantasy. They do have romantic subplots. There is some romance in there, but it's just kisses. So it's sweet, clean romance that they don't, no jumping into bed or any of that side of things. So it's the younger end of young adult. That's what I write. So I'm working on 2 series at the moment for various reasons that I'm not sure I'm necessarily going to repeat. I'm alternating books in 2 series, one about dragons and one about fae.
Ooh, that sounds amazing. But I will say, I love that you kind of approached it, because that's what I've had to do in order to free up my writing, was to approach it like, I'm writing this for me, for nobody else. Then all the expectations, I just kind of throw out the window. I'm like, I'm not worried about meeting anyone else's expectations except for myself, and saying that I just want to get this idea on paper. And I feel like that has really opened the door as far as like my writing habits and how often I'm writing and my productivity in writing too. Because I felt like I was always getting stuck thinking, does anyone really would like this? You know what I mean? So, and you did mention, I know we kind of met through a writing, speaking of writing, like through a writing group. And you had mentioned, or you kind of sent me some information about the 365 writing challenge. So I'm always up for a challenge. So I'm so curious to know, what is this, like, what is the 365 challenge, writing challenge?
It started as an offshoot out of the 10-minute novelists group.
Oh, okay.
So, I don't know if you've heard of that. And it's sort of, it's developed over the years. I'm not sure how many years it's been run. I wasn't involved with it right at the beginning. But it started off as Catherine Grubb, who set up the 10-minute novelist group. She challenged some of the other people to write 1,000 words a day for a year. But now it's a lot more relaxed. You can set your own goals, both in terms of word count, you know, how many words do you want to write in a month, and also in terms of how many days a week you want to write. So obviously, writing 365 days a year is a challenge, but it is also not necessarily the best thing for everybody to do. And for some people, writing 7 days a week all the time, that is what they need to do in order to be able to make it a habit and to do things. But actually taking a break and having some time off and, you know, maybe not working at weekends, or I don't know, not working on Wednesdays, not writing on Wednesdays, or whatever you want to do, is actually for many people healthier.
Well, and I love that you mentioned that. And I love that they took that into account, because I'm very much the same way. Like when I hear 365 challenge, writing challenge, I'm intrigued, but at the same time, I'm a little intimidated, because I'm like, I don't know if I can write so many words, words every single day. I want to theoretically, but also too, I talked very recently, like last night, with some author friends of mine who were saying, we were talking about burnout. We were saying burnout's a real thing. And sometimes we have these really high productivity writing periods, but then we have to refill that cup, right? We have to kind of take that rest in order to get more writing productivity done. And so how did you become an admin for that? Is it like the NaNoWriMo?
A little bit. I haven't really got involved with NaNoWriMo. I know it exists and I've done it a couple of times, but I'm not really that far deep into it. I joined 365 Writing Club in, I think it's 2017 now. And, within, obviously there's the big group of people who do it for the year. And then within that, you're grouped into smaller groups. And you have like a check-in. So as well as like having the accountability and being able to set your goal, there's a whole load of other stuff as well. So we run contests 3 times a year, and there's various different challenges, and we give out like badges at the end of every month for have you hit your goals or not. And, there's office hours, so you can talk to Jessica White, who runs the group. And she can, you can chat to her, and she loads about writing and publishing. And, you can sit and chat with her, or if you've got questions, you can take them along and have a bit of a discussion about that. And within the group that I was in, the first year or the second year or something, I can't even remember now, I started interacting more and things. And so at the end of the year, they were like, hey, we're looking for new admins. Would you like to come and join? And so I did, and I still am.
So, nice.
Yeah.
So it's a group that's been around for a little bit, and sounds like it has a pretty big network, right? So they're writers of like kind of like all around, right? All around the world, I assume, and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's definitely international. And there are people who are in it every year and have been since it first started. And there are, every year there's new people as well. So it's great to get to know people as well as see old people and also have the new faces coming in every year. So it's run mainly through a Facebook group. So that's the main point of interaction. Although every year we keep talking about doing something instead of Facebook, but we haven't quite got to actually taking the step away yet.
Well, if it's working, right? So, I mean, it sounds like you guys are growing. So that's a huge, step forward. That's awesome that you guys are still connecting with writers and gaining, more people who are like, yeah, I really want to get involved in this challenge.
It's an annual challenge. So you can join the website, which is 365writingchallenge.com. And then you can join the mailing list to find out when signups open in the autumn. So it will open in November time for next year.
Okay. So it only happens once a year.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And so it's typically November, you said, correct? Fall time.
Yeah, it's normally about October, November, and then it shut, the sign up shut about the end of November. So we've got time to get everything processed and ready, and then join in. So everything's ready to start in January, because of course it's Christmas and the end of the year is really busy for everybody. So we want to try and get as much done so it's ready to go on the 1st of January without impeding what all of us are trying to do, and holidays and all of those things. It's 365writingchallenge.com, and there's also 365 Writing Challenge on Instagram as well.
Oh, fantastic.
So if anybody wants to connect on there.
So Instagram, Facebook, and then through the website.
Yeah, the 365 Facebook group is only available to people who are members. It is a paid group. I think it's about $60 or something for the year. So the Facebook group is only for paid members. There is a page that people can like, and then maybe if Facebook chooses to show information to them, they will find out about when it's coming up in the end of the year.
So since you joined, how's it been going for you? Do you find it's been very helpful?
Certainly. At the beginning, I don't think I would have actually started doing anything if I hadn't signed up for it. I signed up for it and I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And I started with a really low goal. My goal was I was going to write 1 page of my notebook, which was 100 words. Because, I had small children, and I'm like, even the idea of turning my computer on and waiting for it to boot and getting into something, that's just too long. I can't do that. I can't commit to doing that. I'm going to write a page in my notebook. And that's what I did. And quite often that 1 page ended up being 3 or 4. And then I started realizing exactly how many notebooks I'd need to write a novel, because that's quite a high number, and just the typing out time. And I got more into it, and I was realizing that I was writing more than the 100 words that I'd set myself. So I gradually built up and switched to using the computer and transferred what I'd written in the notebook into electronic form. And I've just been building from there. But certainly when I first started, it was joining the group that really made me actually do it. I mean, I've got blog posts, because I used to have a blog that I did intermittently. And every year I'd write a New Year's post. Here are my New Year's resolutions. This is what I'm going to do this year. And you go back and look at all of them, and it's write more. And I want to write more. And I want to write more. And I never did.
Well, and I think that's always the challenge, right? For us as writers, is just finding the time to write. And I really adore that, because I've been trying to do that more too, is set those achievable goals, right? It's all about setting the achievable goals. Because I think sometimes as writers, especially if you're kind of new or kind of just getting into it, a lot of times you think to yourself, I'm going to write that novel in a month, just like, NaNoWriMo. I know I've never really written too much creatively, but I'm going to write a novel in a month. Why not? And we set these big expectations of ourselves, when a lot of times it's the small steps, right? The small steps get us further down the road. So
you take it, you do a little bit every day and it builds up. Whereas if you just try and do everything all in one go and then you just give up, then you don't get as far. Just writing 100 words a day doesn't seem like very much, and it doesn't seem like you're going to do very much. But even 100 words a day, at the end of a year, you've got, what would that be, 36,500 words?
Yeah.
And that's something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's development, so you have made progress. And I think it's about getting progress, not so much perfection. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And trying not to overextend ourselves too, because like I mentioned, burnout's a real thing. And I've seen that happen quite a bit with several authors who are just churning out book after book. So if someone like me, I know and I'm sure having small children, you had a hectic schedule. So how How did do you have any suggestions, or you learned anything from the 365 writing challenge to help build in writing time?
You need to be realistic and work out what are your non-negotiables that you have to do. You have to go to nursery or pick up from nursery or the swimming classes or whatever else you're doing. You have to cook dinner and then work backwards from there. It's like the story of the filling up the pot. You start the pot and you put in all the giant stones, and then you put in all the littler stones, and then you put in all the gravel, and then at the end you put in all the sand. The big stone, the bigger the stones are, is the more important they are. You have to sleep, you have to eat, you have to do stuff with your family, or if you've got another job or whatever else, whatever other responsibilities you have, and then you add in all the other things. What do you have? What do you do to relax? What do you have? When do you read? And when do you write? And then it's important to be realistic and not imagine that you're suddenly going to write 10,000 words a day, because that's a huge amount. And even if that's what you want to do, you have to build up to that. So, find the half hours and the extra bits of time. Maybe you don't watch so much telly, or you get up a bit earlier in the morning. I don't do mornings. Get up early in the morning is never the answer for me. But there always is some bit of time, and then it's the sticking to it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you 110%. And I'm a little more productive at night. I'll say that too. I feel like I'm waking up in the morning, so it takes a little bit to kind of get moving and get those creative juices flowing. So I'm more of a night owl myself. That's where I kind of go. So I feel like I love the advice of being realistic and kind of knowing where to put your time, because it's a lot of times we have to prioritize, I think, but also to prioritizing. I know that some people have told me you want to prioritize your writing as well. Like after, of course, the important things like your family and your job and everything like that. But maybe like in your downtime, like you mentioned, or within those small spaces. I actually found at the time, a couple of years ago, I found time to write when I was commuting, because I would take the train. So I would just either write on my phone, or sometimes I would have like a small laptop and I would actually write a little bit. It was only like a 30-minute jaunt, but it helped. It actually
all adds up.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's like those small, like we were talking about, the incremental steps that'll get us further down the road. But that made a huge difference in part for me. Like I said, I know every writer struggles, and especially those who have, like, I know I heard a long time ago, I think it was, you have to write 1,000 words a day. I think it was, to be a serious writer. I know, right? It's one of those things. It's like, you don't have to be a serious writer.
No.
You just have to take the small steps, or like you said, write 100 words a day, something to where you are writing. You are a writer, and that's what you do. You just write, and then whatever works best for you. As writers, I think we all have those days where we struggle with writer's block or don't feel creative enough. I know I struggle with those days constantly. Are there any methods like you have found within the 365 writing challenge, or within the other communities, that you have to say suggested for being motivated with writing?
And this is not necessarily to do with the 365 club, but what I do if I get stuck is I start making a list of all the things that aren't going to happen. No, they're not going to go to the moon, and they're not going to end up in underground, or and the most ridiculous things you can think of. Just start making a list. These are all the things that are not going to happen. They're not going to jump off a cliff. They're not going to get trapped in a cupboard. They're not going to spend all day reading, or whatever. And then eventually you go, actually, I know what they're going to do. They're going to go and they're going to do this, and then it sort of clears that block of what's going on.
That is so funny. I love that as a suggestion. What a fun little exercise too, to kind of go through with your writing. Because I have heard like different methods of that. I have not heard that one. I adore that one though, because you know exactly what they're not going to do. You may not know exactly what they're going to do next, but you know what they won't do.
Exactly. Yeah. And you've got to be the more ridiculous, the more outrageous. Just go into every other genre that you're not writing. And they're not going to ride a dragon. If it's a contemporary romance, they're not going to ride a dragon. Of course they're not. There aren't any dragons in the real world. Wish there were. And just go outrageous. They're not going to meet the queen. Go wild with it. Let your imagination run wild and try out all these other things that.
Right, exactly. Zombies aren't going to appear out of nowhere. So things exactly. like that. What a great little creative exercise. Cause I have heard different ones too, where it's like you describe everything in the room, but I know sometimes too, my brain will get tripped up on that too. Mm-hmm. But I think that would be for me though. I think that would, and I like that suggestion specifically for what they're not going to do, because I think that shifts my brain into another mode of thinking. Yeah. And I feel like that would really help as far as when you're writing, thinking like, oh, okay, I can be creative with this. Now what can I do that they will do next? Yeah. You write enough and then suddenly it becomes obvious. Of course they're going to do this. Well, exactly. Like that feels.
Why did I ever think they were? Why did I ever have a problem with this?
I know, right? Once you start creating the hypotheticals of what they won't do, then it becomes way more easier of like, oh, well, of course, then of course they would do
exactly
this next thing. So I like that too. And sometimes for me too, whenever I get stuck creatively, a lot of times too, I actually go to girlfriends. And that's why I mentioned the 365 writing challenge, because sometimes when you build those communities, I know that I've gone back into those communities and been like, so I have this, I'm stuck here. Can someone help work me through this? Or because there are certain author friends. I feel like we all have certain author friends we go to for certain things. And that's usually and sometimes I go back to the well on them on certain other things to help me work through and brainstorm.
The other thing that you can do is just to step away. I've had enough of staring at the computer. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to go and cycle through the heath or something, or I'm going to go and do something, consume some other form of art, to be inspired by paintings or music or something else that's not words, and then use that to help come back in later.
Well, and didn't you mention you were working on 2 different projects, right? Because I do that too. I actually do that too. And sometimes I walk away from one project and I'm like, okay, I'm going to shift my mind over to this other project, which may be a different genre, a totally different vibe, a different book, or even just a creative endeavor like the podcast or something like that. And I'm just like, I'm just going to shift my focus on that right now.
Yeah.
So is that kind of why you write 2 different, or you were just inspired?
And at the beginning of 2020, I decided this is the year I'm going to publish a book. So I had the book, I drafted it. I'm like, okay, by the end of the year, I will have edited it and I will publish it. And I put that up for pre-order. And that was planned to be the first of a trilogy. And that was what I was going to do. That was me. I work better with external deadlines. So putting it up for pre-order and knowing that that's my date, that's then I've got to work backwards from there and things. Of course, 2020 didn't quite go to plan, and kids ended up home from school, and homeschooling while editing was not what I planned to do. But in the middle of that, I was also invited to join a anthology with the idea of it being a Fae anthology, stories about Fae, young adult fantasy authors, all of us. And the idea was it would be an anthology of prequels, and then we will all then have a series to use that to then lead people into our series. Okay, I'll do the first book of the Dragon series, and then I'll set up a pre-order for the next one of this, for the first book of a Fae series, leading on from whatever story I write to go into that for April. So then I ended up alternating them.
Oh, nice. Well, and I love how you said you set an external deadline for yourself, and that in order to try to meet that. And I think that's we mentioned, accountability, and that's a great way to kind of hold yourself accountable. I do the same thing. That's why I'm always like, I try to set dates for myself, and I try to speak them out loud and try to set them in my calendars and put them out in the world to keep myself on track.
I was going to say that within the 365 group, that accountability is a big part of it. And it started really as a shared spreadsheet. So we have a shared Google Doc spreadsheet, and every week you can go in and say, okay, I wrote this many. You have your line in the spreadsheet, and you can see what everybody else is doing if you want to be nosy, or you can just go in and look at your line and say, okay, well, this week I wrote 500 words and I wrote on 5 days. So there's different pages. Previous years, it has been more complicated. We've scaled it back down a bit this year because most people weren't really using it. So yeah, that's, you go in and you can do that and see how it's going.
I am also a very visual person. So external deadlines and something visual, I think, helps solidify sometimes that progress you're making. Like you said, even if it's like we talked about, even if it's incremental steps, we could still see that, okay, we are doing something. We are making progress here. We are taking the necessary steps to finish that goal. And accountability is such a big part of writing. I know, because because I feel like I probably would have thrown in the towel quite a long time ago if it hadn't have been for people in my group encouraging me, or having that kind of accountability there. And I will admit, I tend to get distracted very easily with other projects. And I know being a writer can be very isolating. And we talked about the 365 writing challenge, having those friends there to help keep you accountable. Have you found there are other methods to doing that too? Or have you found that is like your biggest kind of support group there?
Yeah, I'm also part of a small group of YA fantasy authors. There's 13 of us, I think. And we have a weekly Zoom meeting where we sit and talk and share learning and discuss things that we are struggling with. This week I want to think about making hardcovers. What do I need to know about that? Or I want to talk about running Facebook ads or whatever else. We talk about everything related to the business side of things and the writing side of things as well. And we also share weekly goals. So we say, okay, this is what I did well. This is what I achieved last week, and this is what I want to do this week, and we'll cheer each other on. So, in fact, that's the same group of people from whom we did the Fae anthology to start with, and who we're doing the podcast. So the podcast that I'm involved with, the Reading Queens podcast, is drawn from that group of people. Not everybody wanted to be involved with it, but we're 11 of us running a podcast. We're not all on at the same time. There's 3 or 4 of us in each episode, and we just sit around and we chat about books, and it's just fun.
That is fun. And how lovely that you have that kind of group that kind of as a soundboard, figuring out what works and setting those weekly goals. Because that's always when I feel most productive, is usually when I go with my girlfriends. We don't do a weekly chat, but that might be an idea I capitalize on, because that is wonderful. I love it.
It's funny because it only started when COVID hit, and Valia, one of the people in the group, was like, right, we're going to have who wants to have a Zoom call? Now we're all stuck at home, wherever we were. Most of them are in America, and one's in Canada and one's in the UK, and I'm here in the Netherlands. So it's like, okay, when can we actually do this where we can all meet up?
What a great little method. And I like too that, and I know we're part of that group too, of Catherine McClatchy's Unleashing the Next Chapter.
Yes.
And I love that she also does, every Wednesday, she's usually doing some kind of chat about the business of writing.
Yeah.
And I think that's really helped encourage me along the journey too. Yeah. I think that's being in those different groups that offer different things. And I love that you have such a little tight knit group. That's awesome. I think as writers, that's really important. I have that kind of tight knit group too. So I think that's a huge part of accountability that I think we sometimes as writers don't think about too often. It does feel it can feel like a lonely journey.
Yes. Yeah. And having those close people really does help, and having even a wider group as well that are there cheering you on.
And I love too that you guys share information like that, because I do the same thing. I'm just like, okay, I'm thinking about running a Facebook ad maybe. How's it worked out for you? Or, hey, I know right now, you mentioned you have your, the Reading Queens, right? Podcast. Yeah. And so when you mentioned that, I was just like, well, of course I want Clarissa on my podcast. Like things like that you can share around with other people. I know I'm helping Catherine McClatchy right now with her podcast. I kind of been giving her pointers on how I kind of manage mine. So
I'm looking forward to hearing what she comes up with.
Me too. I'm so excited because she's already kind of told me kind of some of the episodes she was thinking about doing, an interview she's going to do. So I'm thrilled to hear all about it. And once she releases it, but I think that's, having those soundboards there, having those different types of accountability partners, because I see what kind of success or what other friends of mine have done. And I'm kind of like, man, I want to do that too. It kind of just pushes me to want to do that, Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
So that's such a great motivator. I feel like sometimes for me as a writer. And I've also found that building good habits can come from structuring my time and projects. Yeah. So, and I know that's probably really important too, if you have, like you said, you and your family with your kiddos. And so one thing that has been surprisingly and incredibly helpful has been the podcast for me. It's kind of kept me on that weekly kind of cadence. And I usually have like certain days are my recording days, certain days are my editing days. And I know that you also co-host, like we mentioned, a podcast called The Reading Queens. Have you found building habits elsewhere kind of helped you build that podcast, or has helped improve accountability?
As I said, there's 11 of us on the podcast. I'm co-hosting the podcast, and there's only ever 3 or 4 of us on once. So I'm not, although there is a new episode every week, we publish on Wednesdays, I'm not on it every week. So the podcast doesn't give me that much of a schedule. I wish I was on it more. I would. It's so much fun. I love doing it. But I'm not on it every week. So that doesn't give me that schedule. So, but I definitely need a schedule. I mean, I put everything in my phone and my phone calendar. My children have learned to listen to for it. When we've got to go to school to take them to school, when we've got to pick them up from school, when we've got to go to this or that or the other. I couldn't function without my phone calendar. The days it goes screwy, I'm like completely lost.
I'm the same, but I'm the same way. Only not with my phone calendar, but I do have I have the old school scheduler, the planner. Yeah. So I love writing.
No. I need the beep. I need the beep. You need the beep. Okay, you've got to go.
Well, that's important to have, I think, too, sometimes is knowing what works for you, and obviously having that phone all the time. And like you said, with the beep, if that's something that, tells you, okay, I need to get to the next thing, or I have a schedule, something coming up, then that's important to know. I think just as much as accountability, just having that thing there that you can always that'll set you up for success. Because that's what works for me, is having certain days to record for the podcast. I do like that. That's amazing. You guys have 11 kind of co-hosts there with the podcast. I kind of wish I had more people who are co-hosting with me on the podcast, because it makes it easier, right? To put out that content and talk more. And like you said, it's kind of just kind of a fun chatting session. So that's an amazing way to set yourself up for success, and kind of building in that either accountability or, like I said, better writing habits.
And I keep looking at things and thinking about how I can change things. As I used to have it where every day of the week, as long as I tried to write, I'd then have, a particular task. So one day I'd do my newsletter, and one day I'd, work out what I'd done last week and set goals for this week. And then one day I can't remember what else I had. And I'm like, no, this isn't really working, because I'm just, so, all right, okay, Monday, I'm going to do admin, and then the rest of the week I can write. And having made that switch, it seems to be working out for me, actually, because there are a lot of things that I'd been putting off doing. And, the admin time that I had been trying to fit in every day got squeezed. And I just did the bare minimum. And now I actually I've got the whole day to do these things. So I can spend time, looking at hashtags for social media and working out which ones I want to use, or, adding a new page to my website, or looking over my automation series in my newsletter, or all those other things that you have to do, but you always put off. So I'm finding that really helpful. And I'm always looking for new ways of doing things and thinking, is this really working for me still? Should I look at doing it in a different way and things? So yeah.
And I think that's so important. And you know what? I started doing something similar. Like I thought the same thing. I was like doing kind of a little bit of the things that I really don't like on like most days. And I did the same thing. I siphoned it down to like maybe 1 or 2 days a week to like do these really things, like you said, you don't really want to do, but you gotta. I ended up going through it and actually like saying like, okay, I only got to do this for 1 day. I don't got to do this the whole week.
Yeah.
I only got to do it for 1 day. And then I can get to some of the other more creative and or fun things that I enjoy doing or writing. More importantly, I can get some of the writing done that I need to get done. Like you said, kind of view things and say, hey, is this working for me? Like question it and see, is it really working for you? Are you kind of getting the best productivity you can out of it? And if the questions know that you're kind of fighting some of it, maybe it's a good thing not to kind of shake up your structure a little bit to see where you can get a little bit, better productivity through your writing and through, all the other admin stuff. Is it important for writers to know what methods work best for them to carve out that writing time?
Yes, I think it is. And everybody has a different process, and it's important to work out what's best for you. Just because one person does one thing and that works for them doesn't mean that that's going to work for you. Some people do really well with like lots of short, sharp sprints during the day. Some people like dictation. Some people prefer longer blocks alone to really sink into their story. And one of the problems of writing novels is it's a very big chunk and it's very difficult to experiment. What you do for one novel isn't necessarily what's going to work for another one. You might need try different outlining methods or anything, but the novels are so big that trying to learn from one to the other, it takes a long time to work out what is the process that works best for you. And then by the time you found out what it is, you've developed as a writer anyway, and then probably something else better will do anyway. So it's an ongoing process to work out what your methods are. And I'm a high learner. I love learning things, and I'm always looking for new methods of outlining or of doing story character arcs or whatever else. And I might not be the best at implementing them, but I love reading about story structure and all of those things, and just learning different ways of how it all puts together and how it all works. And then I've got to wait 6 months before I'm actually starting to outline a new book and be able to do anything about all this stuff that I'm trying to soak up. So yeah, definitely you need to experiment and try different things.
Well, and I had a girlfriend tell me that too. She's written several books as well. And she said every time she writes a book, even if it's in the same series, the process changes. Like, cause she, like you said, she's grown as a writer, and the book just necessitates a new process because it's still in the same series, but it's a different book. So, and I kind of love, I think that's why I love being in the writing community so much. It feels like we're all learning together, and everyone always seems like they're thirsty for knowledge as well. And they're always looking to better themselves, better their writing, or better, like you said, their process, because it's not a one size fits all, and everybody has different methods. And even as we grow as writers, we realize, okay, that method didn't work, or, that type of writing structure or those writing times don't really work for me.
And everything else around you changes as well. I've got children, they grow up every year, they're doing different things, or their schedule's different. So at the beginning, every school year, it's always like this big jigsaw trying to fit everything in. And then I've got to fit in what I'm doing as well. So it is an added complication. So it's never the same. Maybe my husband's doing something different. He's in Peru at the moment. That throws everything up in the air. Yeah. And summer, winter, it's all different changes that you've got to roll with.
Yeah. And you know what? And that's kind of why I like you mentioned with the 365 writing challenge, it kind of gives you a little more permission to kind of do what works for you. within those writing goals. And because you're absolutely right, life just gets in the way, right? Life gets in the way of our writing time. So we got to figure out where we can fit in that writing realistically, or where we can fit in those little pieces of times. And those methods, like you said, just don't always hold true throughout. Like what worked for the first book may not work for the second book or the third. So it's important. I think we do learn those different types of methods and or styles, and keep learning, really, or listen to other, like you said, podcasts, maybe listen to other podcasts and figure out different methods of writing. So I love that. I adore that answer, because I feel like I'm the same way. And I, like you said, kind of towards the, kind of like we talked about earlier, it's giving yourself that permission, right? To just kind of write and not worry about the expectation. I feel like that's been the biggest game changer in my writing. Is I feel like I want to write when I'm writing mostly for me. And that may not work for the next book, but at least for this beginning one, it's been really motivating and helpful in that regard. You mentioned that you are a co-host with like 11 other co-hosts.
It's 11 including me.
Oh, 11 including me.
There's 11 in total.
So with the podcast, Reading Queens. So can you tell me a little bit about that? I'd love to hear more.
We chat about books. So
is it mostly YA fantasy books?
It's mostly YA fantasy. It's not exclusively YA fantasy. Sometimes, we have talked about contemporary books and we have talked about adult books. And I think there's like a whole episode on dystopian type sci-fi books. But sometimes it's just more of a chat. We have a topic to talk about, like villains, or, what are the best things you want? What are the 3 books you want to read this summer? Or something like that. Or other times we look at a trope within books, and we each read a book that has that trope. And then we can discuss how it's presented, what we think about it, or different examples of it in the books that we've done. We try to not do too many spoilers, and it's just a lot of fun. And we've also done sessions about like TV shows. So we had I think there was this one on Bridgerton, and we've done one on June, and there was I think there was 3 or 4 on Shadow and Bone when that came out last year. And we also did one talking about Jane Austen, and there have been a few talking about writing topics, like how various writing topics and things. So it's a lot of fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And I love that you guys take a little bit of like what's happening in the current discourse, right? With like Bridgerton or Shadow and Bone, because I love people who take like timely topics and like kind of break it down into like you said, either tropes or just kind of talking about it, what works, what doesn't, and things like that. And especially things that were books before. That's always fascinating me. It's like how they translate those things on there, and what other authors think of like maybe book versus film, or how it kind of translated on screen.
We've also done some author interviews as well, both within the group and with other people as well. So
sometimes you guys talk about and sometimes you guys talk about your own books. Nice. Fantastic. So where can listeners find the podcast?
Oh, it's on like all the podcast things. So it's on Apple, and it's on Google, and it's on Spotify, and it's on Anchor. And I don't really know. I don't deal with that side of things, but it's there. It's called Reading Queens. We also have an Instagram account that's Reading Queens Pod, and you can find out all the details on there.
Oh, awesome. And it's it's a weekly podcast, right?
Yes, every Wednesday.
Fantastic. And where can listeners find your books, and how can they connect with you?
Yeah, my website is clarissagosling.com. Very original. It's my name. And I'm actually doing a lot of TikTok at the moment. I'm really enjoying doing little TikTok videos. So if you want to have a look at those, it's also Clarissa Gosling. I do post on Instagram. There, I'm Clarissa H. Gosling. Somebody was already Clarissa Gosling, which I'm slightly outraged about. But
yeah, I did that when I was tagging you in some of my Instagram. I was like, who is this?
The Instagram, you got to put the H in the middle, because otherwise it's somebody else. So, and my books are available on Amazon and Kobo and Google Books and Barnes & Noble and Apple and Tolino and everywhere else, really. And they're on Radish as well. That's quite fun.
Thanks so much to Clarissa for joining the podcast. The links for the 365 Writing Challenge, as well as how to connect with today's guests, are in the show notes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a comment about the show. It helps listeners find the podcast and the amazing guests who have taken part. If you prefer, feel free to drop me a line on any of my social media pages at Romance the Story. I love hearing feedback, and I'm always looking to make the show better and more interesting for writers and readers like you. I do have a Buy Me a Coffee page as well, so if you'd like to support the show that way, it's always appreciated. Link is in the show notes. Book recommendations for this episode: Dragon Shift by Clarissa Gosling and Fae Fair by Clarissa Gosling. As always, be safe, stay well, and keep writing. Bye!